it's June and I'm going to talk about the books that I've read over the last month. There's 2 of them. So the books I've read are Star Signs by Linda Goodman and Myths of the World, which is sort of edited by Tony Allan. So both sort of quite mystical, otherworldly books in their separate ways. Right, so first I'll start with Star Signs by Linda Goodman. So this was recommended to me. It sort of covers all sorts of otherworldly things. I thought it was going to be a lot about astrology and a lot about star signs because Linda Goodman is an astrologer. But it really wasn't actually barely anything about astrology. It was all about sort of other ways, other mystical ways to influence your life and maybe change things in your life that you're not happy with or go in different directions. Okay, so I've got one little quote out of here, and this is from the preface right at the beginning. Okay, so she writes, essentially, of course, it is good that humans are at long last beginning to realise who they really are, to recognise their own marvellous magical abilities. Behind the explosion of the current mass quest for illumination are the forgotten rainbows and forgotten melodies of remembered miracles. Earthlings are finally becoming dimly aware that they are, in truth, spirits, imprisoned in flesh-body temples and afflicted with an eons-old amnesia of each individual's true identity and birthright of divinity. So she talks a lot about this sort of coming age of Aquarius, because we're moving out of the age of Pisces, which was sort of started by Jesus and can sort of be summed up in that whole sort of archetype and the storytelling of the time. If you think back about history, it's all about the stories of history, and we're now seeing, as we leave that time, many of those stories crumbling and falling away as we move now into the time of Aquarius, which is a much more sort of, is a lot more directions it could go in, and there is a big drive to make us more spiritual beings, to get in touch with many possessions that we have that we don't utilize in terms of the way we use our mind and our powers of our mind and our bodies as well, the way we use all of ourselves. Obviously, there's also another tangent that humanity could go off on, which is a very sort of technological, perhaps avatar way, where you have like a hive mind of intelligence and the AI intelligence, and you have an avatar, so you feel like you're physically doing a lot of things without actually doing them. Personally, I like the person version rather than being sort of fed into a group thing. I'm not completely sure how it's going to go. I think that Aquarius can tend to maybe be more, I don't know, it could go anyway. I think that Aquarius can be quite unpredictable, so it could go anyway. Anyway, so she's talking a lot about people looking for this, having this feeling that there's more they could be doing, there's more they could be getting in touch with, and finding other ways to do that, ways to get spiritual. So she's sort of put this book together of, there's a lot of different influences that she's brought together that she speaks about. So some of the things that she talks about are things like, so she comes across as very spiritual, but then I felt like the things that she was talking about were actually quite shallow. So it was like money, diet, and things like that, which I don't know, maybe you should be letting go a bit more. Anyway, so she talks about some things like giving money away to get more money. I don't really quite agree with that. I think that you should let go of any beliefs about the true value or importance of money, because money is, it's not even real. It's just money is just a form of communication, and it's a tool, like anything, like the internet. The internet isn't good or evil. It's how people use it. And I think it's the same way with money. Personally, I would like to see a complete move away from money, because I think that it's kind of, I think it's been tried so many times, but it's always fundamentally flawed because it becomes too much of a way of using power over other people. So personally, I think we'd all be happier with no money. Maybe that's why I don't have a problem with money, because I don't put any attachments onto it as actually being of true value itself. Okay. So what she's talking about is, I think the reason she's encouraging people to give money away is to try and be released from the suffering, from the grip of the fear of loss. Okay, so it's where people are scared of not having money and things, that they kind of grip on to needing it, that actually makes it harder for them to come by it. Whereas if you are more like freely giving it away, the theory is that it should flow more easily to you. Okay. She talks as well about medical astrology, which I'm quite interested in. I don't think I'm as rigid with astrology as she is. I think it's good to be aware of your astrology and your influences. I found that really interesting, but I wouldn't want to be defined by it, because otherwise it's like any belief system. If it's too rigid, it becomes a bit of a trap. But she does talk about things like planning events such as operations, depending on where the moon is and things, and how that is affects in your chart. And I think that makes a lot of sense, and that would be kind of an easy thing to fit in. She talks about diet, which I didn't really, I don't know, who knows? Didn't really seem to make me think it was going to work. She talks about men and women and how men and women are different, but that we're both of masculine and feminine, and learning about that, which is really interesting. Like stuff about that. The stuff about ghosts and karma. I didn't agree with the things that she said on karma either. I think there is truth in it. There is some truth in it, but I think that that's a very simplified version of it. So there were things that I didn't really agree with. The coloured diet, the coloured plates thing. I mean, you could try. I don't really like when anybody says, here's the answer, this is what you need to do. I think people are more complex than that. You only have to look at something like diet. Everybody wants to try and find the right diet, and we're different, we're complex. Something I thought was really interesting that she talked about was Nikola Tesla, who I really, if anybody can recommend a really good book about Nikola Tesla and his research and things like that, and how he came to those conclusions. I just think it's so interesting. Seems like the world could have gone in a really different way there. She talks about numerology and words, lexicograms. I mean, it's okay. I think stuff like that is okay, but I wouldn't put too much faith in any one system. You know, and it's like tarot, which there was a lot of links to tarot in there. I wouldn't get too het up on each individual system. One of the things I thought that was interesting that she talked about is how sound is numbers, is light, is mind, and that's really interesting, because I do think there's a lot of things that are the same, whether it's a physical thing, colours and sound, I think is kind of an easier link for people to see, but also that maybe that is like numbers is the patterns of life and all these sort of things. It's like everything's the same thing, we just see it in a different way or experience it in a different way. That's really interesting. I'm interested in that. I've got a couple of quotes about those things, so let's have a look. 343. So she writes, just as there are tones of colour in the rainbow spectrum which can't be seen with physical vision, such as ultraviolet and infrared, there are colours of tones in the music of the spheres which can't be heard with physical hearing. In the beginning, certain sounds produced different sets of vibrational frequencies in the ethers. Some of these were of such low frequency that they formed particles of what we call matter or physical substance. There would be no light as we know it, without minute specks of matter in the ethers to reflect it. There is an intimate connection between colour and sound and all other expressions of life. I mean, that sounds like, there's there's stuff in there that sounds really interesting. So getting onto the lexicograms, this is where you sort of take a word and you look for other words in it, or a phrase and look for other words in it, and then you can use those words to perhaps make sentences. I think this is quite subjective and sort of, I mean, she does say your own influences are going to affect it. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that like things like, she talks about abortions and she really sees it from her own point of view of trying to justify abortions. Whereas, you know, with that word abortions, you could get completely the other point of view as well. So, you know, how much truth, I'm not saying there's no truth in it. I think you can get impressions of things, but I don't think it's as straightforward as perhaps, or as revealing perhaps that she makes it out to be, because I do think there are other, I was amazed by the fact that she didn't find in abortions like a son not born, you know, and things like that. It's like, look, to rob a son is a sin. Like, you could find that in abortions as well as the other things, which were, you know, I'm not talking about your opinion on abortion. What I'm saying is that you could come from either way at it and get, she's come very much from one side to kind of prove a viewpoint. It's like, but you could completely come from the other side to prove the opposite viewpoint. So I don't see how that's been helpful. I liked when she talked about sort of like the past world, or maybe a different version of the world where things were different, where you had sort of two suns, like, you know, two suns in the sky, which meant you didn't have night time and no gravity and time, and that all sort of you know, rings a bit of a sort of bell with me. I feel like there's something in all that there are other versions of the world that can perhaps exist like that. She also talks about how you can live forever by changing your beliefs about death. I don't agree with her, because she's talking about like actually physically living forever in this body, this one that you're in now. I mean anything's possible. Obviously we're in a universe of infinite possibilities, but I don't think that that's actually the plan with this life. So anyway, I think overall in the book there was some stuff that was very interesting, and I think this book came out quite a while ago, say before the internet, when it would have been really difficult for people to get experience of these ideas. So I can understand why it has been very popular, although personally I think I just didn't like her. Who wrote the book. I felt like she was too much like, here you are, I've got the answers. I've got everything you need to know. Here it is. This, just do all this, and it's like life doesn't come with a manual, you know, whatever that manual looks like, it just doesn't work like that. I found it too prescriptive. But I do understand the appeal of it. She's also got a lot of links to like Rosicrucian and things like that, which are ways of using this sort of esoteric knowledge for personal gain. As I say, it talks about sort of money and appearance, diet, things like that, which I don't completely agree with, such as a big drive for manifesting things at the moment. And I sometimes think, you know, who do we think we are necessarily to say what we think is exactly how we should be living our life, and then just pull on the strings of the universe to get whatever we want. We should be getting to understand ourselves a bit more, and maybe contemplating a bit more on why we want certain things, and rather than just sort of selfishly going for you know, using whatever powers we can to just get what we want. Okay, that's my personal opinion. Okay, so that's that book. The other book I read, Myths of the World, edited by Tony Allan. So this book, it's looking all over the world at sort of old myths and things like that, and giving you just a little taster of a lot of them. And it's a fairly big book. It's over 300 pages, and you've got a myth a page. Okay, so like each page has a sort of edited version of a myth. So it's nice to get a little taste of things around the world, and you can definitely get a different feel for different regions. I was going to just tell you some of the areas. So, I mean, it really covers a lot of areas. You start right in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, Greece and Rome, and then onto the Celtic world, Viking and Germanic worlds. And there's also different areas that I wouldn't have thought of, like the Slavic East, Tibet and Mongolia, Japan, and then also like the Arctic, North America, South America, Africa and Australasia. So it really travels around. So it's quite interesting to get a bit of a different viewpoint from all these different ages and places. Although for me, I felt that the stories were probably all a bit too brief. You maybe didn't get a full understanding of what the whole story, the message of it really was, because it was quite a brief edited version of it. And I also found a lot of them a bit boring. Now, whether I found them boring because it was such an edited version, I don't know. But it was a bit boring. So I was going to read a couple of them out, but a couple of the less boring ones. Okay, so this one is the washer at the ford. One common theme of Celtic myth is that of the washer at the ford, the war goddess who waited at a ford, sometimes in the form of a woman, sometimes as a crow or raven, and determined which of the warriors who passed would perish on the battlefield that day. Okay, so that's like an introduction. Each one's got like a sort of introduction to it. So, on their way to battle, a band of warriors stopped at a ford where they beheld a terrible sight. A tall phantom woman, her eyes red and angry, glowered at them through grey matted hair. At her feet, which were awash with blood, lay the mangled corpses of warriors, some so hideously disfigured that not even their mothers would have recognised them. As the warrior band gaped in horror, the woman let out a hideous shrieking laugh that sent a shiver of terror down their spines. Slowly she raised her arms and pointed a bony finger at each man in turn. At last the chief of the band approached the woman. With much effort he forced himself to speak. "Who are you?" he asked. "I," she screeched. "I am the Morrigan, the Phantom Queen. Some call me the Washer at the Ford. My work is to haunt all the streams of Ireland, washing away all the sins of men." "Who then," asked the band's war chief, "are the sinful men who lie in this gory heap before us? Are they those you have killed and maimed today?" The Morrigan cackled again. "I did not kill these men, nor have I so much as harmed a hair on their heads." She peered deep into the warrior's eyes. "Look again at these dead warriors. They are the very men that stand behind you, as they will be this evening after the battle. I am merely washing the blood from their limbs." The chieftain looked again at the corpses and began to make out the features of some of the comrades accompanying him. The Morrigan slowly bent down to rummage among her gory bounty, then held up an object for the chief to see. He turned to look and beheld, dangling by bloody locks, his own severed head. Ooh, that was a bit of a creepy story. I like that one. What else is there? Oh, this one. So this is from sort of Viking, Germanic area. So Thor fights the world serpent. So it talks about Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, so large it could wrap itself around the world, was Thor's most formidable adversary. The gods meeting with a giant gave him an opportunity to destroy it, which he greatly desired to do. Thor was travelling across Midgard, having adopted the appearance of a young boy. During this journey, he took lodgings at the home of a giant called Hymir, who was about to undertake a fishing expedition. Seeing this as an opportunity to confront the world serpent, Thor inquired if he could accompany him. The giant looked him up and down and replied dismissively that he would not be much use as he was too small. Thor, mindful that he needed the boat, had to restrain his temper. Hymir ordered his companion to find his own bait, so Thor tore off the head of the largest ox in Hymir's herd. The pair launched a boat and rowed fast until Hymir said that they had reached his usual fishing ground. Thor insisted that they continue further, so they took up the oars again. When Hymir suggested that it would be dangerous to go any further because of Jormungand, Thor ignored him and rowed on. Finally, Thor chose a strong line with a huge hook on the end, to which he fastened the ox head before throwing it overboard. Deep under the sea, the Midgard serpent went for the bait and swallowed the hook. It pulled away so violently that Thor was flung dramatically against the side of the boat. Summoning up all his strength, he pushed his feet through the bottom of the boat and braced them against the seabed. Then he pulled up the serpent. He was about to lift his hammer to strike the monster when Hymir cut Thor's line so that the creature sank back into the sea. Thor threw his hammer in after it, and some say that the serpent's head was struck off, but most people say that it lived on and still encircles the world. Now, if you've watched my other videos where I talk a lot about snakes and serpents and what their meanings are, this is interesting to think about the serpent wrapping around the world, still having that hold and control over the world. Okay. So, last one, the miniature hero, and this is from Japan. So, one childless couple, tradition has it, was so desperate for a child that they begged the gods to bless them with a baby, even if it were no bigger than the end of an adult's little finger. Taking them at their word, the gods responded by giving them Isun Boshi, little 1 inch. Isun Boshi's parents were delighted, despite his minute size, and brought him up lovingly, until at the age of 15 he announced his intention of going out into the world to do heroic deeds. He used a rice bowl and a pair of chopsticks as a boat and oars to make his way downstream. A needle and hollow straw served as his sword and scabbard. Arriving at Kyoto, then the capital, Isun Boshi entered the service of a noble family. One day he had to accompany the daughter of the house to the shrine of the goddess Kannon, where she wanted to pray. When 2 evil spirits attacked them, Isun Boshi hopped about furiously in an attempt to distract them. Seeing him, one devil reached down scornfully, picked him up and swallowed him whole. Setting about him with his sword, the midget bodyguard caused the demon such unbearable pain from within that he coughed him up and spat him out before doubling up in agony. Isun Boshi then leapt straight at the other demon's eye, where he once again put his sword to work. Soon both demons were fleeing from the scene of the ambush. Leaping unhurt to the ground, Isun Boshi was receiving the thanks of his grateful mistress when they spotted a magic mallet the evil spirits had left behind them in their flight. It was a lucky mallet indeed. If banged on the ground, it granted a wish. Isun Boshi's lady did so, wishing that her retainer be a normal size. All of a sudden, there stood her champion at her side, a full-sized samurai. They married to live happily, and in his case, heroically, ever after. Okay, so there were 3 of the sort of more interesting stories that I found in the book. But other than that, that's about it. So, to be honest, it was a bit of an unsuccessful month for reading, really, because although both books were okay, they didn't, I wouldn't read them again. But now I'm reading, I haven't got it with me to show you, but I am reading the next Seth book. And I've read a few Seth books before, which I've done reviews for, and I absolutely love the Seth books. So it's really nice to be back reading something that really excites me. So that's all good, and I'll be doing a review for that next month. Okay, so until then, thank you.